We've said goodbye to the stiffies.
And hello to the squishies. Hi guys, welcome back to Synch Owners. I'm Matt.
And I'm Greg.
And today we're coming to you from our garage because, yeah, typical British summertime, springtime, whatever you want to call it, it's awful out there. So
It's ridiculous.
We're taking cover. But today we're going to talk you through the process of fitting suspension forks to your Synch Super Monkey.
It is worth noting this is quite an intense technical task to do. If you don't have the skills, you're not very confident, or even don't have the right tools to do it, we recommend speak to Synch direct or have a word with your local cycle shop. At the end of the day, you don't want to do any irreversible damage which could void your warranty.
That's it. I mean, Synch supply with everything that you need to get this kit on, but as we've said before, it can be quite involving, and unless you are confident in this kind of thing, we don't recommend doing it yourself.
But with that in mind, let's crack on.
Let's talk you through it.
Cheers.
Okay, so first things first, we want to try and raise the bike off the ground if we can. If you don't have the option to raise the bike off the ground, we'd recommend doing this with probably 2 or 3 people, just because you have to support the weight of the bike. That being said, I'd probably put something down on the floor as well. We're using foam sheets, but you could just use any old sheet, just anything to prevent the frame from being scratched if you are doing it on the floor. Right, so first things first, we want to get our screwdriver, and we're just going to pop the cap off the end of the hand grip. So what we're going to do is get our screwdriver now, and we're going to put it underneath the grip. I'm just going to do it enough just to give us a bit of leverage. Then we're going to get some soapy water and just spray that underneath the grip. And if we lift the screwdriver up a little bit, and that should allow it to disperse. And then with any luck, we should be able to take the screwdriver back out again and twist the grip to release it from the handlebars. There we have it, and then we're going to repeat that exact same process for the other side. Right, so now we've got both of our hand grips off from the handlebars. We'll start by removing the components from the handlebars themselves. So first of all, we're going to have to remove the gears, and for this we're going to need a 3mm Allen key. Next up, we're going to have to remove the brake lever. For this, we're going to need a 5mm Allen key. And then finally, remove the light switch, and for this we're going to need a 2.5mm Allen key. So moving along the handlebars, next up we're going to remove the display. To do this, we'll take a 3mm Allen key, and we'll just keep a hand underneath just to make sure that if the nut falls out, it doesn't roll off and get lost. And then finally, to remove the display, we will just flex the plastic brackets over the bars, and these should just stretch off. Once the LCD has been removed, we can then go to the other side of the handlebars and remove the remaining components using the same tools that we used for the opposite side. So now we've removed all of our components from the handlebars, we're going to start feeding them through the forks just to make sure they're out of our way when we come to remove the current handlebars and forks. The LCD display will not fit through until we've removed the bracket from the back. To do this, we'll just use a 3mm Allen key, and we'll just remove both of the bolts from the back. So once we've managed to pull all of our components and wires through the forks, we have just zip tied them to the frame to make sure they're not hanging and they're not knocking around on the bike while we go through the rest of the fork and handlebar removal process. Next step, we're going to be removing the mudguard, and to do this we'll take our 4mm Allen key and just undo the single bolt, nice and straightforward. Straight from the mudguard we're going to go to the wheel, and the wheel is just a 15mm spanner, both on either side, and we're just going to unloosen those enough and drop the wheels straight out from the forks. So the next stage is going to be removing the brake caliper. We're going to fit a brake pad spacer just to prevent any unwanted compression of the piston if the lever accidentally gets depressed. Always a good practice, and they can be picked up cheap enough. Now it's time to remove the brake caliper. So for this, we're just going to use our 5mm Allen key and just undo both bolts, and it will separate away from the forks. So we've moved our brake caliper out of the way, and we've secured that at the back of the bike so it's not going to get in the way for the rest of the process. So as you can see, the only thing we've really got left to do is to remove the handlebars before we start taking the forks off. So we'll move straight onto that section now. Removing the handlebars is very straightforward. We're just going to use a 10mm spanner and a 4mm hex key, and we'll just undo both of those. Removing the handlebars is very straightforward. They might be in the forks quite tightly, so the best tool we can recommend for using here is a rubber mallet. This isn't going to damage the paint, but it'll also help greatly in pushing the handlebars up and out of the forks. So now we're nearing completion of removing the forks. So the next step is taking off the crown. So we'll take off the little rubber bung, and then we will take our 5mm Allen key, and we'll just start to slacken the top of that off. Once this has been loosened off, we can take the bolt out and also take the cap with it. With the cap and bolt now removed, we're going to take off the crown. For this you'd ideally need a 36mm socket, but we know that not everybody's got one of those, so we're just going to use a pipe wrench, and we're just going to carefully begin to undo this. So with the crown removed, the next step is to undo both of the clamps on the yokes. For this we'll use a 5mm hex key, and then we're just going to unloosen those. We don't need to take the bolts out, and then exactly the same on the top. That's right, and then when both of those are loose, what we're going to do is we're going to push through the centre column of the steering, and that should come out of the bottom with a little bit of teasing. Now with our centre column removed, we'll take our 5mm again, and we're just going to unloosen the clamps on the forks. Now with both clamps loosened up, we'll just take our rubber mallet again, and we'll just gently tap the yoke, and we'll free that up from the forks. And now we're able to take the forks away from the bike. Once the forks have been removed, we want to take the bearings out of the cups, which were located at the top and the bottom of the frame. We need to keep hold of these bearings because we're going to transfer those into our new forks. Right, now comes the exciting part of the process. We're going to start fitting our new forks. In order to do this, we're going to have to dismantle the top section of the forks. This is very straightforward. It's just a case of removing the crown, the spacers and the top yoke. So let's take our forks, and we're going to grab the bearings which we removed earlier on, and we're going to position the first bearing on the steering column and push it down to the bottom, and then we're just going to thread the forks back up through the centre of the frame there. And then we'll grab our other bearing, and we're just going to thread that one down on the top and grab our yoke. So we've pushed down the yoke as far as it could possibly go using our mallet, so we're going to now reassemble with our spacers and also place the crown on the top, and just like before, rethread back in the bolt right in the centre of the crown. And to do this, we'll use our 5mm Allen key, and we'll just tighten that up all the way. And this should, in theory, pull together the remaining slack between the top and bottom yoke on the forks. So we've just finished tightening up the crown at the top, which has pulled all of the yokes and the handlebars together. So now we need to tighten up the clamps, which are on the yokes too. So we're just going to take our 6mm Allen key, and we're just going to get all of those nice and tight. Now we've tightened up all of the clamps. It's important to note at this point that we haven't tightened up these bolts on top of the crown yet. We're going to wait and do that once we've got the handlebars installed so that we can ensure that the handlebars are nice and straight and level. Speaking of handlebars, it's time to approach that one. So we're going to take our 5mm Allen key and we're going to remove all of the bolts holding the handlebar clamp in place. Now we're going to position the handlebars inside the clamp. When we do this, we want to make sure that the handlebars are nice and central, and then we'll begin to put the first bolt straight back in on the clamp. At this point, it's probably worth noting that we shouldn't be tightening the bolts all the way up, and we want to go to opposite corners and just make sure they're nice and finger tight to begin with, and we don't want to tighten these all the way up just yet. Now we're going to go straight onto the brake caliper, and to do this and mount it on the new forks, we're going to have to take off the original mounting support bracket. It is literally a case of just taking out 2 bolts and the caliper should come free from the bracket. Now it's time to fit the brake caliper back on the forks, and first of all we're going to start off by feeding the caliper back through the centre of the forks there so we can reach down to the mounting point. But at this point we're going to have to pick up our caliper adapter, and what this is basically going to do is give us a little bit of space when we come to mount the caliper on the forks, because it's a different sort of distance than it was on your old bike. Well, I'll say on your old bike, on your old forks should I say. So to do this we're just going to take the adapter, keeping into consideration the orientation of it, and we're just going to mount it onto the caliper before threading it back onto the forks. Again, this should be a very straightforward process. I'd get it finger tight first and then use the 5mm hex key and just adjust that. It's important to note at this point that your components for your adapter may vary slightly. They all work on the exact same principle, so I wouldn't stress about it too much. Right, so we've now got our brake caliper installed, but we haven't fully tightened the bolts yet. We've left it reasonably slack. It's important to do this so when we come to mount the front wheel on, that there's still a little bit of movement in there, because we will adjust the brakes once the wheel's on. We'll take our wheel and we will make sure we've got the orientation of it correct, and then we'll just begin to mount it back on the bike. Okay, now I've got the front wheel mounted back on. Everything else from here forwards is just going to be a reverse of everything that we did at the start. So we're going to be replacing all the components back onto the handlebars. There are a few precautions you have to take here in making sure that all of the components go back onto the right side of the handlebars. But it's all very straightforward, and if you've come this far, I'm sure this bit's going to be easy for you. Right then, so for this stage of the process, remember earlier on I told you to not tighten up the brake caliper all the way. So this is the reason why. So what we're going to do, this is where it's preferable to have 2 people again, is to hold on to the brake lever and we're going to pull this tight. And what that's going to do is allow that brake caliper to line itself up nicely with the disc. And at the same time, Greg's going to be tightening up those bolts to make sure that the caliper stays in perfect alignment. Right, so we're ready for the final stage of the assembly, and for this you want to take the bike back off the wall mount, and we're going to focus on getting the handlebars into the position that we want. So for this, remember earlier on we said about keeping those bolts slack at the front. So what we're going to do is get yourself comfortable on the seat into your normal seating position, and just move those handlebars to where you find it most comfortable. This could be closer to you if you're smaller, or if you're taller with longer arms it could be further in front of you. you have that flexibility. I personally find it most comfortable around about that position.
Happy?
I'm happy. And then we're just going to tighten up those 4 bolts at the front, and that will prevent the handlebars from moving. Right then, so as part of the handlebar adjustment, if you also remember at the start, we didn't tighten up the base of the crown because we need to make sure that the front wheel and the handlebars are in perfect alignment. So now is the time to make sure those handlebars are sitting nice and straight and parallel with the front wheel. We'll double check that before we then grab our 5mm hex key, and we're just going to nip those bolts up nice and tight. So there you have it, that's how you fit the suspension forks to the Synch Super Monkey. So how did you find the process overall? I thought it was a little bit sort of tricky in places, but you know.
Yeah, it's certainly more technical than our previous videos, but that said, right tools, right skills, and enough confidence.
Yeah, that's it. And I think ultimately now we're just itching to get out on the bike and give it a proper test with those suspension forks on it, and yeah, out for us and out for you as well. Yeah. We'll catch you soon, guys. Keep checking back on the channel, like, subscribe and all that jazz. Catch you soon.
See you on the next one.